thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We really appreciate it. Our topic today will focus on the FedRAMP authorization process, and you'll hear from our speaker, who you can hopefully see, Eric Adams. Eric will help you understand the FedRAMP process, the effort that it takes to achieve FedRAMP authorization, and then also just try to help you determine, are you ready to embark on what is a significant undertaking. FedRAMP authorization is not your ISO 27001 or SOC 2 certification. It is a significant effort that requires a lot more time, resources, and investment. So before we get started, we'll go ahead and cover some housekeeping items. Again, thank you for taking time to join us today. This is part of a continuing series on standards and compliance. Our goal is just to help everyone keep up with the rapidly evolving changes. The session is for cloud service providers who are interested in going through the FedRAMP authorization process, or perhaps anybody who is wanting to learn more or interested in helping another organization get through this. So you can expect the session to last about 45 minutes. We'll leave time, about 15 minutes at the end, for questions, and all participants will be muted during the session. This session is being recorded in case you didn't catch that when you joined, and it will be made available on our website in a few days following the session here. So at any time, please submit your questions through the chat feature. So we'll be monitoring those, we'll collect them, and then Eric will do his best to answer those at the end of the session. So again, thank you. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Eric Adams, our guest speaker. Eric has a wealth of experience helping organizations get through the FedRAMP authorization process, but I can't do Eric justice, so I'm going to let him go ahead and introduce himself. So thank you again for joining, Eric. Thanks, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for that great introduction. And I'm super excited to be able to share some of the experiences that I've had working with the cloud service provider going through FedRAMP authorization, and also being able to relay that information to you. So thank you very much for taking the time to be able to watch this webinar, whether you're watching live or a recorded version. So let me just go through a little bit of experience that I've had, especially highlighting FedRAMP experience. So working at Hewlett Packard, I worked at HP from late 90s up until 2015. And that last part was working through the FedRAMP authorization. So I was working in a department called Fortify, and we had a cloud version of this software, which was Fortify on Demand, with static application security testing. And so we'll talk about some of the process of that I saw going through this and relate that back to that experience. But the start time when I started on this, I was actually working at a customer site, and they were using the on-premise version. They said, wow, you've got this cloud version in commercial. We'd really like to use that, but we don't have this thing called authority to operate to use cloud systems. And so that's when I started looking into this, and I recognized this from working for other government contracts using NIST within HP that HP had previous to Fortify. And so I started a draft package March 2013. And so we're going to talk about what draft package is later in this presentation. But I was able to get a kickoff with FedRAMP 2014. If you don't recall, there was a government shutdown about October timeframe 2013. Threw the timeline off a little bit on that. So got that kickoff then and got through FedRAMP authorization February 2015. So really throughout that time, I learned a lot about the process. At that time, I joined IBM Watson and Cloud. They had a whole lot of acquisitions into their portfolio. And so about 30 of these were scoped to go through FedRAMP workshops to prepare their SaaS for FedRAMP if the time came needed to be able to go through an authorization. We got a couple of those through audits and listed on the board. So very good experience there. And then throughout, I've kept very close with FedRAMP. I've been a CISO for FinTech 2018 through current, been through a few different FinTech CISOs. Now I'm doing this independently with a CISO advisor and FedRAMP consultant. So keeping current with that role. All right. So let's ask a very important question before we even start to go through the process of a FedRAMP authorization. And that very important question is, should my company even pursue a FedRAMP authorization? Is what I have as a cloud service, me being a cloud service provider of an application for commercial customers, is this a good fit for an agency customer? Is this something that government can even use? And on the side of FedRAMP, bringing an offering into their portfolio, is this going to be a new offering into the FedRAMP marketplace, such as the static application security testing that I was a part of? That was a new item, and it was something that was needed. Or is this an existing capability that's going to offer competition when government is looking at getting RFPs at testing other capabilities? Do they have other choices? And that's something that they also want. And on the cloud service provider side, how do I go through this when I'm looking at this? Do I build a separate system just for government, or do I use my existing cloud service that I'm using for commercial clients? Do I try to authorize that? Or it could be for existing government clients, but not yet gone through a FedRAMP authorization. And so there's kind of that, okay, you need to really go through that. So what does that look like? And we'll talk about that and optimal paths as we go. All right, so let's talk about what I feel is the most optimal path, and that is being able to build a separate environment just for government. So how do we go about doing that? Do we just replicate everything that we have in our existing commercial ecosystem of cloud servers, database servers, application servers, all of this stuff? And it could be containerized, could be Kubernetes clusters, could be anything. But do I replicate all of that into a new government environment? But understanding in that existing commercial environment, you might have 500 or 1,000 or how many ever customers. So it's a pretty big environment. What I've seen to do this at the best path is to start out small. So let's say you've got 60, 70 servers in a commercial cloud system you're operating already. You could start this with maybe 15 or so systems that are in your government cloud environment, and thus you're saving hosting costs, licensing, management time of the people that are taking care of that. And also it's easier to build to these heavy FedRAMP security standards. You don't have so many systems that you have to be able to take all of the specifications and apply them to these all these systems. And then also understanding that it's scalable as you grow customers, as you bring in more customers. That's why cloud exists, because you can simply add to it. You can add it and scale it as you have growth. Also, one of the most beneficial parts to building a separate government community type of system is it's a non-production environment. And so there's no worry to break things while you're uplifting these security controls. There's not already customers using it. And so it's a little bit different when you're looking and comparing that to authorizing an existing system, which you may have to do, and so you'll tread lightly. Also, one other caveat to this, understanding with your agency that you're working with and understanding government community cloud systems, that if there is a requirement that those are only going to be other government customers in that cloud. So you have to understand that with your authorizing official. We'll talk about that later. Here's another one of the biggest things before you start into it. Does this make government sense? What is the return on investment? And does that look the same as with commercial clients? Now, understanding with commercial clients, you simply can spin up another, if it's multi-tenant SaaS, you can spin up another tenant, or you can build a proof of value, proof of concept tenant. The customer can try it. If they like it, you get a contract, they sign it, they start using it. Simple as that. Government customers are different. They have an RFP process in most cases, and they have a longer evaluation process. And with cloud, it's required to go through FedRAMP. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like later and the timeline. But from business sense, we want to understand that return on investment. But as you can see on this top bullet, there is some of the demand that we're seeing, that these government type systems is forecast to surpass some really high numbers in value. You can see that on the screen. And so therefore, even though it's a longer path, it is worth it. But understanding how that is going to work, how you onboard customers, if it's a fit for agencies, that's the work that you've got to do. Also, one other thing to think about is you might have the case where you are a third-party capability, such as a security capability, and that you're already a downstream security control for existing FedRAMP customers that are supplying a government service to a FedRAMP or to a government agency. Therefore, you need to go through a FedRAMP authorization. And so there's really that, like, if I want to keep these customers, I might be on a corrective action plan that says I'm not yet a FedRAMP leverage capability. And especially with NIST revision 5, being able to have a table that shows those leveraged authorizations that have FedRAMP authorization, that you need to work towards that in order to keep those customers. All right, so what are the key steps going through a FedRAMP authorization? What do I need to know before I start? There's a thing that's called in process. And once you get to an in process designation on the FedRAMP marketplace on fedramp.gov, you have a year to be able to get through that authorization. So that's assuming you've got your draft package, that you're working with an agency. We're assuming that this is an agency authorization, which is most of them, and that you have the OK approval from the agency authorizing official to start. So once you have all those things, which it takes a long time to get to there, that's where you hit the starting line, and that's where you have 1 year to complete this. So for planning, you have to make sure that you have management commitment. You understand the investment required to be able to do this, the personnel that you might have to hire in order to supply the roles to take care of the system, and understanding these time frame constraints. And also, if you don't have FedRAMP expertise, that you're using a consultant that understands this, that has led a FedRAMP authorization, not just being a part of a team that had a small part in it, but that's actually led it to a successful authorization. So communicating this to management and validating their understanding is key before you start, because there's a lot of these requirements that are not the same, as Chris mentioned, in things like a SOC certification and authorization or some of these others. It's a different looking framework. Then also, like I said, you've got to have a prospective agency customer and their authorizing official approval before you start a FedRAMP authorization. Now, here's where we run into a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario, because what the authorizing official is going to expect when you first get a call with them is they're going to say, well, do you have your draft system security plan package with the attachments? Do you have it completed in a draft mode? Well, that's a whole lot of work. And so most cloud service providers do not have that unless they've done their homework about FedRAMP and they've got all these personnel together. They're working with consultants or a FedRAMP leader, and they've been able to do all this work. Like I said, when I did this the first time, it took 6 months. And so after that, you kind of understand the process a little bit better. You can do it quicker. But if you haven't done that, then, and you've got that agency request to be able to start and the authorizing official OK, then you need to start completing that package with those subject matter experts and a FedRAMP leader consultant quickly, because it's a lot of work. And we're going to look at all of the pieces and components to that in a little bit later. Now, if yes, then you simply engage with the FedRAMP Project Management Office. The procedure is listed on fedramp.gov in order to start that. You get a meeting with them. They also want to know if they have acknowledgement from the agency authorizing official that they're willing to oversee this, and they provide that ultimate authority to operate from the agency side. And they're going to make sure that you go through the FedRAMP process. And so then once that is complete and the PMO says, okay, you can start, they will list you as FedRAMP in process status on the fedramp.gov marketplace. All right, so we talked about the system security plan draft package and what all this entails. Is it a lot of work? Yes, indeed it is. And again, it has a stringent requirement to it because government wants to make sure that you're doing all these controls. When you are a cloud system, cloud service provider, you are providing a cloud on behalf of government. And so one of the biggest parts and one of the most awesome things that FedRAMP has done is in the fall of 2023, they separated the FedRAMP security controls out of the actual system security plan. So it's a separate attachment. That is one of the things that takes the longest time to be able to complete, because you go through all of in a moderate designation, 325 controls plus all of their subcontrols. You have to answer those, and that's where you have your subject matter experts, whether they're DevOps team members, software engineers, network security engineers, security personnel, even human resources and other personnel, to make sure that you can ask those questions. And when you go through this on a draft package, you don't have to be perfect, but your answers have to be clear, concise, and consistent in order for someone to read your as-is status. And you're going to mark those controls, whether they're implemented, partially implemented, or not yet implemented, but planned, and how you plan on addressing those controls. What's really awesome about that is you're able to get that and throw it into project management to understand the level of effort that it's going to take to refine your security controls and your documentation. So that's a big one. The first big one in the appendix is the FedRAMP security controls. There are also other things such as related acronyms. Those go along with it. They're in the SSP. That's just a text sheet. The policies and procedures. This is something, again, where you have a knowledgeable person who's gone through FedRAMP as a consultant, that they're able to help you produce these in the manner that FedRAMP expects. And those follow the NIST 853 guidelines for policies and procedures. Things like a user guide. That's something you probably already have if you're operating this for a commercial client. That's simply how you use the system. It's usually in a PDF format, and you also include that as an attachment. Digital identity worksheet, that is how you provide authentication, authorization, and that is included within the SSP. Those are for the accounts. Rules of behavior form. This is something that whenever you give an account to someone, you first have to know who that person is, and there has to be a person who authorizes that account. You have to keep track of this. You keep a log of it, and so you have that for evidence that you are doing this. And also when you have your audit, that you have that as a piece of evidence, and that you continue to do so as you operate your cloud service. Information system contingency plan. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but yes, there is a document template available in the templates and documents section at fedramp.gov. This is something that, in order to get this to a level FedRAMP expects, when you're hosted at an infrastructure as a service, an IaaS, so some of the big ones, AWS, GCP, Microsoft Azure, and others, that you can show that you can be able to migrate from your primary processing site to your alternative processing site, be able to bring the application back up with all of the data on it within parameters that you state in contracts to your customer with your recovery time objective, so how long it takes to be offline and back at the alternative site, and also recovery point objectives, how back in time you've maybe lost any transactions. This is one of the more difficult ones to build, and we'll talk about that later. Configuration management plan, that is something that you can build to, again, with consultants, to NIST SP 800-128 parameters for configuration management, but you're also going to use your existing configuration change management procedures in order to fulfill putting that into the plan. Same thing with incident response plan. You're going to use NIST 861 as a guide, and you're going to use your standard operating procedures and fill that out. The CIS, that is your implementation status, so that's an Excel that comes with it. FIPS 189 categorization worksheet. This is something that gives your low, moderate, or high designation, and also the system security plan that you're going to use in the first place with the right controls that you're going to use. And so a high designation is more rare. Those are for more sensitive systems, more systems that are mission critical, possibly warfighter system related. And so they have a high designation. Not only do they have more controls, the parameters within existing controls are most of the times at a higher parameter. So there are those differences. But that worksheet is going to show what type of system categorization that you belong in. Laws and regulations, those are supplied within the system security plan. Inventory workbook, we're going to talk about this later. This is where you have your system inventory, and that it's going to correlate with any scans such as Nmap scans or other that you can show that you can reconcile. Continuous monitoring plan, that is also one that takes some time to be able to build. That is going to be your continuous monitoring strategy guide that you use that FedRAMP has as a guide. Plan of action milestones, these are when you get vulnerability scans or you have vulnerabilities, you notate them on the plan of action milestones. This is supplied as a template and it is updated. It was updated majorly last fall. So though there are more columns to the right that you have to fill out, so you have to understand when these are updated. But this is when you get your vulnerabilities and other findings and you put these on this, whether they're critical, high, moderate, low, you have a certain time frame to be able to remediate those, and you carry those forward. So the ones that you remediate monthly, you put them on the next tab, or if it's critical, more often. And you keep the existing ones and you show how you're planning on remediating those. Supply chain risk management plan, use NIST 800-161 as a guide. That's going to help you with all of the parts and components in your supply chain, how you account for security with those. And then last, cryptographic module tables. That is also supplied in a Word document. So as you can see, just building a draft package, there is a lot of material that doesn't really give it justice to what you're going to be working on just to get to a draft package. So let's also talk about some of the more difficult areas going through a FedRAMP authorization, just to be able to get the application running in a FIPS 140-2 encryption mode. That's both at the network boundary with cryptographic modules, at the endpoints where the customer comes in, where your system administrators come in through a VPN type of network, to make sure that they're running with the FIPS 140-2 encryption cryptographic modules that are required by FedRAMP that are approved, but also that your application is running approved FIPS mode on database and application modes, and being able to ensure that your application is going to run on those stringent type of boundary protection and application modes at FIPS 140-2. One piece of advice is work with your IaaS, your FedRAMP hosting site. There are partners that are able to help with this, that have done this for other applications, because it's very difficult. So that's one piece of advice I would have there. Also, application logging to AU control parameters. That is going to really work with your software development and your code development. And so you typically don't have the right parameters out of the box to be able to log to the specific requirements. And so you're going to need to get on your development roadmap and say, okay, we've got a FedRAMP build coming up. We understand there's customer requests, product requests, enhancements, defect things that are on your roadmap. So we want to get a spot on there to be able to make sure that the application logs to these parameters, and also to be able to fix other things within the application like session timeouts that are required by FedRAMP. So going through that draft assessment, as you're going to find these gaps that you're going to need for your software engineers to be able to build, to get on their roadmap. Creating and testing contingency planning and disaster recovery. This is also one of the longer poles in the tent. So being able to plan for this and being able to understand, how am I going to replicate my data so that I can be able to pick it up at an alternative processing site and test that, go through functional exercises, tabletop exercises, and how to make sure I need to remediate any gaps. That's going to also take some time. So that is a more difficult area. And then lastly, system inventory, again, making sure you can reconcile your system inventory when you do a scan on it, that it does reflect the accurate system inventory that you have documented. but then also the whole process of document refinement while you're uplifting these controls. It does take a lot of time and effort. And this is not an all-inclusive list. There might be others that you find. All right, a lot of people ask timing, how long does this process take? And everything we've discussed so far is preparation. This is just to get to that starting line, to where you can get to an in-process designation. Granted that you have a customer and authorizing official that says, yes, we will be here with you on this FedRAMP process. So this draft and preparation, it takes a long time. That's where you really need consultants or a leader to be able to help you through this process. You need the time availability from the personnel also to ask them questions, to be able to understand more about the system, to document it properly. And once you get through that, you get these gap assessments and you understand really what it's going to take to get through, to get to these requirements to upgrade the system, whether it's getting other capabilities or configuration and testing it, making sure the application will work. And again, this is something that needs experts to be able to help you through this. This is like a marathon. There are a lot of steps and phases to go through. All right, so now that the draft process is complete, and again, this is where we have those things like the authorizing official, the agency that's ready. You meet with FedRAMP PMO. They say, yes, this is something that you can get started as a cloud service provider. And they give you that in-process designation. They give you 1 year to get through the process. What do I need to know about the authorization process? So understanding those 3 phases, which system security plan actually is in the pre-authorization phase. But once you do get that documentation refined to where it's ready, and you do have those system upgrades implemented, you are then ready for an audit. And that's where authorization phase really starts. That's where an accredited third-party audit association, the 3PAO, takes over. And they are the ones to take you through the audit. And that's when security assessment plan, that is the part the 3PO is responsible for. And so they are going to do an audit of your cloud service and your personnel and your documentation to make sure that it is ready and it passes the requirements that FedRAMP has built. After that, security assessment report, that's where you get the findings from the audit. And then the CSP, the cloud service provider, it has a chance to be able to audit or to be able to remediate those to the satisfaction of the authorizing official and also FedRAMP PMO. We'll talk about these in detail, but this is a high level of what is required. So how do I get the system documentation ready for an audit? And this takes a lot of time and energy to get ready. You've got the draft package, but you want to be ready for a 3PAO. You want to be ready for that FedRAMP accredited auditor. So when you start that audit process, they don't say, well, you're not ready, let's try again later. And also, there is time, the clock is ticking. You have a certain time to be able to do this within a year time frame. So making sure your system ready is crucial. Again, you're going through that refinement process. You're uplifting security controls up to full implementation, that your system security plan controls state those parameters and that you can meet those and that you describe them in the text area fields, and also that you can be able to speak to them in an audit, and that those personnel are ready and the ones that are responsible roles can be able to speak to those and be able to say, this is how our system works. And of course, the auditor looks at that and they can make sure that it matches the documentation. So again, making sure things like system inventory is accurate. If you have a switch that's shown on your diagrams and in your system inventory, when the 3PO does a Nmap scan or similar, that if it shows 3 IP addresses, that your documentation says 3 IP addresses, even if it's software-defined networking or whatever it is, that you have that, you're able to correlate it. So documentation of the system security plan and all of the attachments matches that system that the 3PO is going to ask you questions about, that is going to inspect that system and make sure that it matches. And again, that the personnel are able to speak to that as responsible roles for the system. Another part, plan of action milestones, you should be filling these out. You should be doing scans during this time frame that you're preparing for audit. And that when you have those scan files, they're authenticated scans, that they are complete, you've validated the false positives, and that you have completed putting the scan findings onto the plan of action milestones and any other findings that should go on there. And you can show this, that you've done this for a few months, because that's going to be your audit evidence that you collect. You keep evidence during the time that you're getting ready for a FedRAMP audit, but also during phases that we'll talk about after the audit. Also doing things like disaster recovery tests, making sure that you're ready for the 3PO to see this, that you've done those tests, and that you can show that you have the time frame done that says, okay, we're declaring a disaster, a mock disaster, right? And we're saying, okay, this type of mock incident happened. We showed the time that it took to actually replicate the system from the primary processing site over to the secondary processing site. The data's there. We're able to log onto the system, and we're able to use that as if it was the primary system. And then after that, if there's after action reviews, things that we found as gaps, we put them back into the plan. We've retrained people, and that we've had that as the process going forward. So you're going to have to show evidence of that. Show evidence that you've done penetration tests. The third-party auditor will do those, and making sure that you're able to do those in advance. That way you know what to expect, and you're able to more easily remediate those findings. And then making sure things like logging and incident monitoring are operational with your SIM, your security incident event management system, and that your incident response processes to those events, that you're doing those properly. Same thing with change management processes. And so basically you're doing a pre-audit to make sure that you're ready when you go through with that third-party auditor. Again, this is where your consultants are able to help you through that. All right, let's look more closely. Like we said, the security assessment plan, this is where the third-party auditor takes over, and they're able to audit that system. They are going to do the testing of that controls. They have all of the package in front of them. They're able to read it and make sure that it reconciles, that everything works that it works correct, and how you have it documented on your system. Then also, again, they're going to interview these responsible roles. And what I've seen that looks successful in this is that your person who's going to pre-audit the system, that they actually kind of quiz them as they would a third-party auditor, build materials for them so that they can be able to use them as a reference, make sure that they know where in the controls and also in the plans that they're responsible for, that they can be able to point to that when they're asked a question, and that they know how that procedure works. And so really it's about auditing the system security plan, all of the attachments and the evidence, making sure that those roles can be able to answer them. And then the third-party auditor is going to conduct their own penetration test of the system independently. All right, a little bit more in depth on the security assessment report. Again, this is a function that the third-party auditor completes. This is something that they provide as the output from the security assessment plan audit, and the findings that they find from that audit. They then present that. They have that available for the agency authorizing official, FedRAMP PMO, and also for you as the cloud service provider to be able to remediate those. And you remediate those to the agency authorizing official satisfaction, because ultimately they have to ensure that that works for their audit. They're the ones supplying the agency authority to operate, the ATO. And if there's any nuances that the agency needs a little bit over and above in certain parameters, they do that as a risk-based decision to make sure that it's going to work for them. And so there's the review by the agency authorizing official, and then also from FedRAMP as the FedRAMP PMO to make sure that it meets all the specifications. All right, and as soon as that's done, you've got FedRAMP authorization granted. You're listed in the FedRAMP marketplace as a FedRAMP cloud service provider that has authorization. So that's an awesome step and achievement. But is the process over? And I know the first time going through this, somebody asked me, they said, when's FedRAMP audit over? When is this over? And the answer from a very wise person said, well, it's over when you decide to stop doing business with the federal government, because there's this thing called continuous monitoring that we talked about, that you supply different things at an iterative level, using a schedule to be able to provide evidence that you also share with FedRAMP and with your authorizing official. Things that mostly come to mind are the plan of action milestones, the scans monthly, that you have those and you supply those. You keep those for your annual assessment every year. And so there's more things to do. Some of these things I've listed here: vulnerability scans, plan of action milestones, contingency plan testing reports, doing those annually. Same thing with incident response test reports, accounts reconciliation every 90 days. Here's kind of a visual of that. There's about 8 more rows, but you can find this document at fedramp.gov. And so there's evidence that you keep. This is what makes the FedRAMP program, I think, that it works really good. It makes it a good program because you're doing these things on a schedule. You're not just scrambling for evidence when it's time to go through another audit every year and trying to scramble for that, and hopefully that you have it and you've collected it. This is a very methodical process that you go through in order to make sure that you're keeping the system at a security level that FedRAMP and the authorizing official expects. All right, so in summary, why is this difficult? As Chris explained at the beginning, it's difficult because it's stringent for a high security system that the government is expecting to use, because you're a cloud service provider providing this cloud system on behalf of government. And that's the reason it's so stringent, because it has to make sure it passes all of those requirements that FedRAMP has laid out. It makes a lot of sense when you've completed one. When you're first looking at it, doesn't make a lot of sense because there's a lot of things that you have to do, typically not in other audits. But once you complete it, it makes a lot of sense. There's no stone that's unturned. And again, engage FedRAMP experts. If this is your first authorization, if you've got other personnel on board that have gone through one, that's good. As a part, supplying a part to that, that's great. But really, you should have a FedRAMP leader that's helping you through this process. All right, so now it is time for questions, and I'm going to leave this slide up there for services that Tangible provides.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, and thank you again, everyone. So as you can see, and as Eric shared, FedRAMP authorization is not for the faint of heart. It requires a significant commitment throughout the organization. Again, it's not an ISO 27001 or SOC 2 certification. It's a lot more effort. And so, you really want to make sure that you have the right expertise guiding you through the process, and that you have the latest information. Otherwise, you can add significant time and cost to the overall effort. So here are ways that Tangible Security can help you through this process. This is not intended to be a sales pitch, so I don't want to go through each of these, but I'll leave them here for your reference while we take questions. We're happy to arrange follow-up conversations, which include Eric at any time. If you have specific questions about your situation that you need help with, just reach out. In fact, before we finish the call, we'll share our contact information so you know how to get a hold of us. So at this time, please go ahead and share your questions through the chat feature as you have them. It looks like Eric, we can go back here for a few minutes, just leave that just so people can see that for a little bit. So first question, let's see here. Do FedRAMP authorized solutions have a market with state governments?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. I'll answer that. I'm going to give a little bit of a caveat to that. So we do have, or you do see FedRAMP, or you do see, I guess, federal agencies that do operate in different states, of course, with their agencies, and so they would be part of that FedRAMP process. But state have something that's called StateRAMP. The really good thing about StateRAMP is it follows FedRAMP really closely, but it is more designed for state level type of authorizations. So let's say you're in the state of California or somewhere else, you could use this type of process that is also NIST 853, similar to FedRAMP, but it's a little bit different. It's tailored to states. Some might say that it's not as difficult or complex as FedRAMP, but still it ensures that it's accounting for risk at the state level. So it's a very good program. StateRAMP is the program for state level type of authorizations.
Great, thanks, Eric. Let's see here. Okay, we've got some more coming in. So next question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of building a solution on Azure, AWS, or GCP?
That's a good question. So all of those type of infrastructure as a service. So we call them infrastructure as a service. If you look at it like a pyramid, those would be the base level. And then when you're building on top, you might have services or maybe even platform as a service. And then the cloud service, the application being the software as a service. And so choosing one of those type of infrastructure as a service, it typically follows what you're using before, possibly in your commercial environment. But all three of those that you've mentioned are very good infrastructure as a service data center hosting providers, and you leverage their capabilities. So when you're going through a FedRAMP authorization for a SaaS, there are a lot of leveraged controls that you'll notate. And so they have their own FedRAMP designation as an IAS. And so you're able to use those answers that they have, such as the physical and environmental controls. And so you notate their package number when you're building your SSP, and you point to those controls. And each of them accounts for their part as the IAS. They're, of course, accredited through FedRAMP. There are others that are accredited IAS that are also good. It just depends on what the cloud service provider SaaS wants to use as their IAS capability.
All right. Next question. Does having a FedRAMP authorization make getting StateRAMP easier?
I would say obviously yes, because they're both NIST 853, and so you're able to use those same answers. But as you move from one type of compliance framework to another, I always explain this as apples to oranges, looking at the questions and answers, making sure that you read those different questions and understand any nuances or differences in those, and that you're able to explain kind of those remainders that are still there. However, if you have a FedRAMP authorization, you should be able to complete a StateRAMP authorization relatively easy because you've gone through those same NIST 853 parameters.
Great. Let's see, do we have any other questions? We'll give everybody a few minutes in case somebody wants to post one. Okay, let's see. How long does FedRAMP authorization typically take?
That was a loaded question, Chris.
1 week, right? 1 week?
Oh boy, yeah, if you're ready, so that's a really good question. And again, going back to management understanding and expectations, everyone wants a timeline when they see a project. But we really have to understand all of the players involved with this. If we look at it like a triangle, and there's the cloud service provider, that's the work that you're doing. There's also the work that the auditor is doing. And there's also the side of the triangle that is FedRAMP and ensuring that you're meeting all those specifications. And so there's meetings with them, being able to communicate properly with them and letting them know where you're at in this process is very key. Being able to do things like working with a third-party auditor as the audit function and talking to them early on saying, look, we're wanting to go through a FedRAMP process. We want to understand if we want to use your audit firm and how soon can you be able to help us when we're ready for audit. So you're communicating closely with them because they're busy with other clients. And so you might have a waiting period in there. So these are just things that I've observed that can take you a longer process through the timeline that you didn't anticipate. The other part with meeting with FedRAMP PMO, they're busy too. They're working with other cloud service providers and they're super busy. And I've visually seen them and the processes that they take and they go through, and they're incredibly busy. And so the timeline, I'll just tell you this. Again, once you get to that in-process status, you have a year to be able to complete it. So FedRAMP will set that date, and you have to go through all of those phases of ensuring your system security plan, your system matches that, the documentation matches it, that's the first one. You go through SAP phase with the third-party auditor, basically the audit, and then the SAP report and remediation phase, making sure you can go through that and get it approved. So everything before then, building that draft package that we saw, that takes a lot of time. You've got to be able to work with experts, have the time with your personnel to be able to ask all those questions of them and build that package. But then also have that time available for them to be able to support the system. We realize these people are also doing what is, quote, their day jobs if they're supporting another system. So understanding all of those things, if you know that in advance and you're able to plan for those things, that's going to decrease your overall time frame. And of course, communicating with those other sides of that triangle is very important.
So
I
I'll
didn't,
sum it up.
I didn't give
it
you
up
an
as
exact answer, so
I'll sum it
which
up
is
as
the right
as a
answer.
long time plus 1 year.
Yeah, I mean,
Plus
hey,
a long time plus up to a year, right?
if you've got everything in a row and you've got good documentation and if you've got time, I've seen people be able to develop a draft package in a couple months. And so let's say in a magic world that you've got that and you build it in another part of the magic world, that FedRAMP is ready for an intake call with you, and that you have your authorizing official ready and you've got all of those things in a row. It could be 2 months plus a year, but understanding that it takes a lot of level and a lot of preparation to get to that point.
Yeah, thank you. So here's another question. So I heard you mention in process, but I also see FedRAMP ready on the FedRAMP marketplace. What is the difference? So I guess what is the difference between in process and FedRAMP ready?
That is a great question. So when I mentioned that I went through Joint Authorization Board, that's a more heavy requirement because you're working with the CIO level of DHS, DoD, and GSA and others. So you have frequent meetings with them, and they only accept a few of those a year because, frankly, they don't have that much time to spend with all of these cloud service providers. So most of them are agency type of authorizations. And so ready is really a pre-qualifying process to say, we've gone through this smaller ready process with a third-party auditor to look at our system and to make sure it's ready to go through a third-party audit. Now, you can also use that ready process to say, yeah, this FedRAMP is very difficult. Even before an agency authorization, I might want to consider doing that as another step to go through this. So again, talk with consultants about that, but ready is different than in process. In fact, we don't like to use ready because it is that official designation that FedRAMP has laid out for that particular reason. And so really we like to say, are you prepared with a draft package rather than ready in order to start an official in process? And that's something that FedRAMP.gov gives you, that official designation, when they say we have approved that you're ready to start this and you have all of this ready in advance.
Thank you. Then another question, is there a market for AI solutions in FedRAMP?
Well, I mean, the honest question to that is most all solutions are really implementing some sort of AI, or maybe there's a good reason they're not. And again, this is a risk-based program. If you look at that big R in FedRAMP, it's Federal Risk Authorization Management Program. So it's looking at the risk of your system, making sure you have the commensurate controls for it. So when you're looking at that and you're understanding data and what AI does with both the the information it's sending to a prompt to an AI system, any scripting that's occurring, APIs that are occurring, responses back, authorization that you're authorized to be able to see that, it really follows all those other security controls that FedRAMP has. And so you're able to speak to those in the blank spaces for those controls with any AI that you implement in that, any AI, machine learning, robotics process automation, RPA, or other types of automation that you're able to speak with those existing controls. And a lot of those are data-centric type of controls that you're going to speak to.
Great. A few more questions came in. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Eric, if you can. Just that way everybody has our contact information if they do want to follow up and ask, reach out to us and ask some questions. There we go. So there's Eric's contact as well as my contact. I'm Chris Gagne. So we're happy to help and set up follow-up conversations. The next question, what type of solution or product is most marketable to the government?
One they can use. The way that you find this is there are requests for proposals. There's sam.gov. There are a lot of other third parties that also can help with this, but really taking a close market evaluation, especially looking at your existing cloud service. And this is something that should be done as an evaluation, like a business understanding of requirements that government agencies have. Like, let's say an asset inventory tracking system, something like that, or a timekeeping system for employees. And if there's one of those already available, saying, look, I have this available for commercial, I want to be a competing type of other offering that government can evaluate to be able to use this in cloud. That's the reason you do it, is FedRAMP is for cloud. And looking at that and understanding, is this something that agencies can use? Just being able to look at existing RFPs that are out there. That's generally one of the ways that it makes good business sense, is saying, oh, wow, I've looked at all of these either sources sought or request for information, request for proposals, and it's looking for this capability that I provide. And so being able to find the sources, whether it's sam.gov, other sources that may be out there that are third parties that provide these, those are out there as well. But understanding that and then getting to know these agencies too, and just talking to them, being able to talk to their procurement personnel and saying, look, I have a service. This might be under different things like primes or subcontractors. So it's a little bit different working with government systems, but there are resources to be able to help you work with that. And then once you understand that process, that procurement process, it makes it a lot easier to figure out planning and the things that you have to do to fit that model.
Great. I think we've got time for a couple more questions here. Another one came in. What's the difference between high and moderate ATO?
Yeah, and that's something that we talked about with the FIPS 199 security categorization. So those in the moderate classification, when I last looked, those are roughly 80% of the ones that go through. And then there's also a low impact, and then there's a high impact. And there's a different system security plan and controls, like we talked about, that you go through that. But that's something that the authorizing official from the agency will look at it and agree with your assessment before you start, and also FedRAMP, the PMO, that they will agree with that. But there are more requirements for a high designation than a moderate. There's more controls. There are more specifications to existing controls. And the reason that those are for a higher designation of system in that security categorization. One other part to that also is there are impact levels. And so there are charts out there that also not only talk about the security categorization of low, moderate, or high, but also there are impact levels, starting at impact level 2, going up to impact level 6. And so there's kind of a matrix table that you can find that will describe those things, like authentication requirements or other higher level requirements. So there are some systems that I've seen and worked with, especially with some of the larger companies that we mentioned earlier, that do have these higher level of categorizations. And that's if they're working with systems that could be working with warfighter systems or with financial systems that could be loss of a particular, or I guess destruction of a company if it goes wrong. Really, it's looking at that risk, and that's why those are at the high baseline level, is for that designation.
Great. Got a couple minutes left. What are things to watch out for before an audit?
Well, I mean, really being prepared and being able to, like I said, making sure that your system can reconcile with what is written down with the actual security controls, and making sure that you can have those roles and resources ready. You might spend a week with boxes of pizza in a room quizzing the personnel that are required for different things like configuration change management, incident management, being able to prep with meetings at least once a month, and having change management activity review meetings if you're not already doing that. Most places already are. Incident management review meetings, and being able to go through those controls and ensuring that you can speak to those. And so just making sure that you're operating this as you would during continuous monitoring. That's what you want to be able to show a third-party auditor, is like, yes, we've implemented these controls as they're expected, and we are collecting this evidence, and we're ensuring that these roles are responsible for this. We're overseeing this as an information system security officer type of a role would internally, to make sure all of these things are working properly. And so being able to pre-audit is very important.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, and make sure you know that you're going to pass the audit. Make sure you've done the due
That's the goal.
diligence ahead of time. So we are at time. Again, thank you so much. We understand that everybody is very busy, so we really appreciate you joining us today. This recording will be posted. We'll make that available, so we'll follow up afterwards so you can get access to the presentation. And please do reach out if we can help and if you have questions. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.